Do it. How we doing today? Everybody good? So we left off last night, Philippians 3:19. Paul is speaking to these people, and he says, starts in verse 18, like I've told you before, I'm telling you now, and even in tears, many are those who are enemies of the cross of Christ. And then he gives descriptions of them, and then he summarizes everything he said about them, their destiny's destruction, their gods, their stomach, their living for their own desires. He just simply says, their minds, their mindset, it's earthly. Their mind is set on earthly things. And then verse 20 and 21, he said, but our citizenship is in heaven. And we talked about this whole idea that Philippi was a little Rome. And while it wasn't in Rome, it's 820 some miles away from the city of Rome. They lived as if they were in Rome. Everything about them was Rome through and through. And Paul is going to use that idea that you know what it's like to be of one people, though, living in a different place. And now he's going to say, that's what it's like with us. We're citizens of heaven. Heaven's there, we're here, but we're living here as if heaven were here. And that is actually what Jesus told us to pray. May your kingdom come here on earth as it is in heaven. So to be a citizen of a different kingdom means that we have a mindset of a different kingdom. But to help us understand the mindset of the kingdom that Jesus is speaking of, and Paul's speaking about, I think it's going to be helpful for us to understand what was the mindset of the Philippians. Because the Philippians had a Roman mindset, the Romans had an earthly mindset. And if we can understand that mindset that ruled their world, which, news alert, it rules our world too. It rules our world too. If I can understand like what all their world was about, then when we look at what Paul says, okay, here's a different kind of mindset, it makes a whole lot more sense, I think. And so in the Roman idea, it was all about what they would call, we would translate in English, the race of honors. The race of honors. And it would be looked at as a ladder, and everything is just to race, right, to the top. And so all of the Roman society was kind of broken into these stratospheres. And so at the very bottom, like bottom beneath the bottom, doesn't even get a rung on the ladder, is the slaves, like slaves, right? And in Rome, in the first century, when Paul's writing, that could be upwards to 40% of the population. Yeah. In fact, they had like a little synodal council meeting one time, and they're like, who's my slave and who's your slave? You know what we should do? And they actually had this whole conversation about it, that we should designate like something about the way they dress, because the upper echelon had designations. Caesar could wear one color, the Senate could wear a color, then those below them could wear. What if we designated a certain color and we could spot them in the streets? And they're like, yeah, that's a great idea. That's a great idea. Until someone stood up and said, that's a horrible idea. Because if they ever realize how many of them there are, they'll know that they're more than us, and they will overtake us. And they're like, yeah, dumb idea. No special clothing for the slaves, right? Now, they might have some markings on them that would identify them to their owner, and if you found one, run away, like, stuff like that. But by and large, there could have been 40% slaves in the first century at Rome and in a Roman colony. Other places, you get a little further away in a Roman province that's not quite a Roman colony. There could have been 35 or 30. In the day, nobody really knows because, but there were a lot. Upwards to 40% of slaves. How do you become a slave? You could have been captured in war, right? So, you got the Gemites, and they take over the Druites, and they bring home a bunch of Drew's nephews, and then he's like, these are my slaves. We think in terms of slaves of a different way than it was back then. So I could capture you as a slave, and maybe you were a doctor, right? And you're a physician, and you're a teacher, and you're a construction worker, and you're an accountant, and you do taxes. And so when I hire you as a master, like you're a doctor, I kind of need a doctor in my house. I'm going to go. You are an educator. You're going to tutor all my kids because I want my kids to be smart. And like you're an accountant, good. You're going to run my business. Like she's like, no, I'm not good with numbers. So it's just hypothetical. I don't know who the heck you are, right? But so you're gonna, and that's why I would pay more money for you as a slave, because when I go to the marketplace, it's called the agora or the forum, you're gonna have like a little how old you are, where you're from. If you're a man, you're gonna be, I'm gonna see your muscles, and if you're a lady, you'll see what what's there, because it's all about what am I going to use you for, right? And so this is the mind of, so you could have been a captive of war. That's my point. You're not just a nobody. You could have had a really good life as a slave. You're a slave. That's horrible. You'd rather be free and poor than a slave. But slaves, depending on what your education were, where you're from, and how benevolent your master was, it might have been not too bad, but it's not too good either. Don't get me wrong. So you got slaves down there. You could be a captive of war. You could have had a debt to pay that you couldn't pay, and so one of your kids is paying off the debt for you as a slave, or you yourself. You could have been abandoned in the first century. You were a girl, and, well, we were hoping for a boy, and girls were a bit of an inconvenience in the first century, and so you could have been dropped off on the mountainside. You could have been deformed in some way. Take your pick, and you could have been disposed of. That's called they could be dead. I turned it back on, but I will. It's on now, but it does show we have weak batteries. I will await full charge. So that could have been a way, right? There was actually. Because of sin, but Jesus has taken us and brought us to himself. It's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful picture of the gospel. So you got on the bottom rung, or below the bottom rung, about 40% of the population that were slaves. And you got no hope. You got no hope. You are property. You have no rights. You are a tool. You are a tool in the shed. That is all you are, except you have a voice. So you're a tool with a voice. You have a hope. Maybe you could, if you're good at numbers and could kind of get a side hustle and collect enough money, you have hopes that maybe you could buy your freedom by the end of your life, but most people weren't able to do that. You have hopes. You have a nice, benevolent, kind master, and you serve him well, and on his deathbed, he'll write in a will. You get to go free because you're now old, and you're not going to be much good to his kids, and you'd be more of a burden, but you'd rather be free and poor than still a slave. But you got slaves, and they're on the bottom. And then if you could get free, if you could buy your freedom, then you move up. You're on the bottom rung now, and you're a freed people. Freed. Not free, freed. Now, you are kind of free, but there's another level for free. These are freed. You were once slaves. Now you're not slave. But, we all really do remember you were slaves. And you're free now. But a freed person actually would have it a lot harder off than a slave, because when you're a slave, somebody's going to feed you at least a meal or two a day because they kind of need you alive to do work for them. You're freed. You don't have a master, so nobody really needs you around. So you got to rub your own nickels together to go buy yourself some Taco Bell or whatever you're gonna shake down in the city. But you got slaves, and so you got 40% down here. The freed people, that's going to be give or take 25%. And again, these numbers are going to vary depending on place to place and time to time. But you've got freed. You move up you move up a letter on the ladder. You got free. And these are free people, but they were left behind. Meaning, The Romans come into Philippi. They took over Philippi that had been kind of a Macedonian deal. And so you could have some Thracians or some Macedonians left around behind. They let them stay. They didn't conquer them. They weren't carried off to become slaves elsewhere. They were just left there. They can maybe work in the market or whatever. They're going to be pretty low on the ladder and not going to have a whole lot of money. But you're talking about, I don't know, it could be 15, 20%. But they're free. But they're not citizens. They have no rights. They don't have a right to a trial. You could crucify them if they do you wrong. But that here is our free people. And then you move up and you have a citizen. Now we're getting somewhere, boys and girls. These are the citizens. You got about 15%, give or take, that are Roman citizens. And you can still be broke and be a citizen. But I'd rather be a broke and a citizen than a slave. Even if I was a slave that was a tutor of some rich guy's kids, and I had a pretty posh life because I'm just tutoring the kids. You know what I'm saying? I'd rather be broke and a citizen than rich house slave. I know it sounds stupid to you and me, but that's the way it was. And so a citizen, I've got rights. You can't crucify me without a trial. You can beat me, you can behead me, but you can't crucify me because crucifixion was like for the worst of criminals. That's why Paul wasn't crucified, right? And that's why Paul, when he got beat a couple times in Philippi, and the magistrates came and told the jailer, hey, tell him to go home, and they can leave. And Paul's like, tell me to leave. You beat me crazy last night. And that was without a trial. And you do know I'm a Roman citizen. I'm not just going to leave. You're in the wrong, and you can get some deep pahookie. I don't know what pahookie is, by the way. You could get some deep pahookie if the boss finds out. You come apologize to me yourself, and then I'll limp on out of town. Or when he got beat up at the Temple Mount and later in Acts, and he's like, excuse me, you can't do that to me. I am a Roman citizen. I want a trial. Take me to Caesar. And he hangs out at Caesarea Maritima for 2 years. He could have been let go a long time ago, but we won't let him go because he wants a trial. So a Roman citizen has a right to a trial. Peter wasn't a Roman citizen. That's why church history tells us we believe he was crucified. Paul's beheaded. Peter's crucified. None of that has to do necessarily with what we're saying. But you've got a citizen. They have rights. And they can make their way up the ladder. We tracking so far? This is 95 to 98% of the population, my feet down. From here up, it's less than 5% of the population. Some would say closer to 2% of the population. So moving on up, you have what's called the decurions. And they need to have about, $5 or $7 million in their back pocket just to expend. Decurions. And decurions, they're like your local government officials. Like they'll handle the electric company in modern day times, the public works, the water, the sewage, the trash, and they'll handle all the entertainment, so local sports games and things like that. They're going to kind of oversee that. Now they're paying for that. They're paying for all of that entertainment out of their own pocket. But hey, it's good to be up the ladder, and you all think I'm great, and so I just spend my money to entertain you, and I had to buy myself into the position, but you all think I'm great because I make connections with Rome, and I know people, and I bring the goods to the grand city of East Jordan, as it were. And then, I'm making some money on the side because I'm lending money to people below me because it's all about who can scratch my back. And so I'm a patron. They're my client. I'll give them some money. They go invest the money. They make the money. I charge high interest. And so I'm putting stuff back in my coffers. Don't worry. But I'm the decurion. That's public works. That's like politics on a local level. And then you move up. And these guys are the equestrians, right? The equestrians. And that just means like they had a bunch of horses back in the day. So they had money. You guys like horses, right? I thought so. I saw it on your sweatshirt. And so these guys like horses, and they've got a lot of money in their back pocket too, like 10 million or stuff in today's terms. And so the equestrians, they're like the imperial administrators. So the decurions, they're going to do public works here. They're going to collect local taxes. And then the equestrians, they're like making sure those boys did their job. So this is like an upscale letter. They're going to be up in Rome, but they may also be like over armies in different parts and in different provinces and things like that. And then you go up a ladder, a step still. It's okay. I'm a trained professional. You go up a step still, and you've got the Senate, right? And the Senate is even a smaller group of people, and they're going to be hanging out in Jerusalem. And then you've got one step higher. Don't worry, I'm not going up there. This will be the emperor, right? And you only got one of these. So put this in perspective. Back down at the decurions, that's like 0.5% maybe. 0.5 to 0.1. The equestrians, that's like 0.01%, and then the Senate's, that's like 0.002% of the population. And then at the very top of the ladder, you've got the emperor, who's divine, who's God. It's seen. And as early as so Julius Caesar, he's going to be assassinated, and as soon as he's assassinated, they basically deify him. There's this comet that shows in the sky, and it's actually is written on a place that was found in Turkey called Priene, about 9 BC, about Augustus, the first emperor, that basically says he's the Son of God, that he brings peace and goodwill to men. And you're like, sounds a lot like the Gospel of Luke to me. You're right. Where do you think Luke got his knowledge, got his script from? He's talking about Jesus, no doubt, but he is also saying, Caesar did not bring you peace or bread or goodwill. He is an impostor of the true divine Son of God. That's why if you had a copy of Luke's Gospel, late first century, you could get your bahuki knocked off because that's illegal. And so, but you got the emperor up here. He's looked as divine. He's looked at as God. At times they would be worshipped as God. They would, like Tiberius and Caligula and Nero and Domitian, they would say, like, I'm divine. Like Domitian, he's a nice guy. He's around the time that John, the apostle, is writing. And Domitian said to his wife, you must call me your Lord and your God. Nice guy, nice guy. Yeah, he's crazy. They're all crazy. But they're seen as divine, right? And this is the race of honors. And you're probably thinking about, now, what does this have to do with anything? Everything. I'm glad you asked. But this is it, right? This is it. This is it. Tracking so far? And so your whole goal is how high can I get? But we all know most of us are not going to get higher than this right here. The highest we're going to get is to be a citizen. And so this is climbing up the ladder, the race of honors. And what you never find in ancient writings is anybody talking about, you know what? I think I liked it better down below. You never have anybody bragging about what they were and then they went down. In fact, they would say it would be better to never have gone up a ladder rung than to have gone up one and came back down. Like, to come down, it's called to be humiliated. Humiliated. To go down a rung means you are humbled. Humble's not a good thing in the first century. Prior to the writings of the New Testament, nobody ever said, that's a humble guy. He's sure, that Bart, he's so, that Jim Jordan Sr., he's just such a humble guy. Nobody said that. Humble's bad. Humble. But it's because you were humbled. It's because you were humiliated. It's because you had something and you lost it. You're a loser, right? Let me just read you a few quotes of writings from the first century. But I first want to read one about Philippi. And then I want to talk just about what's said when people go down the rungs of the ladder. And stick with me. It'll make sense, I hope, in a moment. Joseph Hellerman says this: Rome was the most status-oriented society in Mediterranean antiquity. And no city in the Greek East was more Roman and thus more preoccupied with honorary titles and public recognition and social status than the veteran colony at Philippi. Like, what's the point? What's the Philippian mindset? How do we climb the ladder? And it's all about stepping on someone else's head. It's always, what's my interest? What's my interest? What's my angle? And when you get to the Senate, like you think our politics are like talking trash to each other and their little debates, and you can't even hit a golf ball, and my mama hits golf balls better than you, or whatever it was Trump and Biden were arguing about years ago, right? They're kind of cutting each other down. Like that's like Sesame Street to the ancient world. I mean, they're paying up all kind of scandal. Of course, some of you might be like, probably going on today. It probably is, and I digress. But nonetheless, like, Philippi is all about status. Let me just read you a couple of quotes. This is Cicero writing in 1st century BC. By nature, we yearn and hunger for honor. And once we have glimpsed, as it were, some part of its radiance, there is nothing we are not prepared to bear and suffer in order to secure it. Shakespeare, writing about the first century. Reputation, reputation, reputation. Oh, I have lost my reputation. I have lost the immortal part of myself, and what remains is bestial. I know that's all a little heady. Let's listen to some real philosophers. This is Jace Robertson from Duck Dynasty. That's why rednecks die doing such stupid things, because they'd rather die dead than disgraced. Speaking of rednecks, you know the number one thing a redneck, I'm from North Carolina, so I identify as a redneck. You know the number one thing that a redneck guy says right before he dies? Hey, watch this. Uh-huh. All right. That's good. That's good. Pliny says this: it's more shameful to lose praise than never to acquire it. He's like, we live our lives to go up, but if you go up and go back down, that's more shameful. That's more humiliating. And I could bore you with a dozen more quotes. One more, Cicero. For all men desire by nature both to be honored and to avoid disgrace. And so again, the honor, the all, again and again, we'll do anything to go up. We'll do everything to go up. We'll climb over anybody to get up. We'll do whatever it takes to whoever it takes, however it takes to get up. And we'll do whatever it takes to go up. And if we go down one, there is nothing worse. Tracking? There once was a world, and I know it's going to be hard to wrap your mind around, where it was all about what people think about me. There once was a world that would do whatever it took to be seen in just the right light, so that others looking on from afar would see how great I am. You older folks in Rome, you know what I'm doing, right? You seen your grandkids with their phones? Yeah. It's easy to throw stones at the grandkids with the phones, but we had our own version of selfies back in the day, didn't we? Sure you did. Sure we did. All right. It's all about going up. Now, this is the motivation, right? This is the Philippian motivation. With that in mind, I want you to hear these words from Paul. And he's speaking of Jesus. And he says, Jesus, who being in the very nature God. He's on the top rung. He's God. He's not just like God. He is in the very nature God. Like, he's like, Jesus, who's God, he, though being in the very nature God, then he says, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Or one translation says, he did not consider his divinity. He did not consider his equality with God something to be grasped for, which is, that's race of honors language. They're grasping, using. What can I use for my own advantage? And Paul says Jesus is God. He's in the very nature God. He's just like God, and yet he doesn't use what he has to leverage himself to go even further. Instead, what's it say? He made himself nothing, taking the very nature of a servant, slave. The word is slave he's using. It's not just like, you're such a servant. No, slave, worst, bottom, below the rung. Though he was in the very nature of God, he made himself nothing, took on the very nature of a slave. And he's like, and then he's like, you see the extremes. Then he's like, Paul goes back up, and he's like, being in the very nature of God, did not consider equality with God, something to be used to his own advantage, but emptied himself, taking the very nature of a slave. And then he's like, and though being made in appearance as a man, made in human likeness, he humbled himself. That's big language to a Philippian. Because the worst thing you could ever have experienced is that you yourself was humbled. That you were humiliated. That to be humbled is to go from anywhere lower, and Jesus goes from the top to the bottom, but he wasn't humiliated. He humbled himself. He humbled himself becoming obedient to death. And then Paul's like, even death on a cross. He's using this language. And everyone in Philippi would have been like, I don't know if I can do that, boss. Because my whole life is to look good, smell good, be good, impress you, and climb my way up. And Paul's like, no, he was up, he went down. And then he's like, and here's the irony. Paul's like, here's the irony. I know, it doesn't make any sense. But therefore, God has exalted him to the highest place, and given him a name above every name, that name of Jesus. Every knee would bow in heaven, on earth, and under the earth, and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is. Yeah, to the glory of God the Father. And Paul's like, it doesn't make sense. He went down. Nobody would go down, but he went down. He wasn't forced to go down. He wasn't made to go down. He chose to go down, and therefore God said, whoop, he'll be greater than everybody. It's that the new way up is down, and down is the new way up. It's Paul speaks of Jesus as one who is descending into greatness. And this illustration that Paul gives, it's great theology. So put that on the shelf. This illustration that Paul gives could have been an ancient hymn, some commentators say. True. Put that on the shelf. But in the book of Philippians, this whole illustration, it's an illustration of a point he already made. And it's the beginning of the verse that I didn't read, but Philippians 2, verse 5 says, in your relationships with one another, have this mindset. And then you're like, what mindset? That mindset. Jesus, who being in nature, very nature God, did not consider quality of God something to be used. Yep, he climbed down, went down. Now God exalted him. He's like, yeah, how Jesus was humiliated, and yet the New Testament writers will take this disgraceful term, humble, and turn it into one of the greatest virtues, to be humble. That prior to New Testament Christianity, no one esteemed this virtue until Jesus lived it out. And Paul's like, oh, snap. The whole world had it wrong. True greatness doesn't step on others. True greatness actually comes down so others could go higher. In verse 5, in your relationships with one another, is really, that's just the example he gives for the teaching he already gave us, which is on the screen in verses 3 to 5. This is the mindset that Paul's trying to get us to live into. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, rather in humility, value, or honor, literally. And the whole Philippian society was all about shame and honor. Shame and honor. You didn't want to be shamed. You wanted to be honored. If somebody got in your way, you shamed them. Today we call that cancel culture. It's the same thing. It really is. How a minority of people with a big voice can shut somebody and erase somebody from whatever fame they had just because they were canceled, right? And Paul's like, hey, here's the deal. Do nothing out of selfish ambition and vain conceit. That was the good, nothing was wrong with that in the Roman world. Vain conceit, selfish ambition, stepping on the side of Bart because Bart's in the way. I want to be Pastor Bart. Nobody would have faulted me for that in the first century. So maybe we weren't talking pastors. We'd be talking plumbers or something. I want to be the plumber of East Jordan or whatever. And so I connive and I lie to his father-in-law. Your son-in-law Bart's a lousy plumber. You do know that, don't you? And he charged me more than Nick. Now, I know Nick's not a bona fide plumber. He does all kinds of other construction stuff, but Nick can do everything. He does it cheaper than Bart, too. Better than Bart. My son-in-law. And then he goes and tells somebody down at the pub that he never would visit. And I just It's just selfish ambition, right? There once was a world when people did what they could do to get a raise. And Paul's like, no, we don't do that. Live like that. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. And then he's like, well, what's the alternative, boss? Because we don't know anything other than that. He says, okay, here's the deal. In humility, value, honor others as if they were actually above you. Now, the ones above you are only meant to get pulled down and become stepping stones. And Paul's like, no. Look at the one that's below you. Look at the one that's equal to you. Look at the ones above you. Look at the one that's equal to you. Look at the one that's below you. Look at the one that can give you something. Look at the one that has nothing to give you. And honor even that one as if they were better than you. That's countercultural even in the world in which we live. Because when I don't get my way, when the customer service rep on the other end of the phone, just raise my voice a little bit, right? When that gal at Target or Meijer or Family Fare or Dollar General and she's all out of your Wheaties, and go back and see if they got more Wheaties. And we just raise our voice and stomp her, not you or we, but, the church across the street. Just kidding, right? That's the world in which we live. I remember, so my undergrad degree is in sign language interpreting for people that are deaf. And my first, big boy job, I worked at a public school, and then I did some freelance stuff, and then I got hired at Bethel College. And I'm interpreting for professors. I probably shouldn't share this online. I was once interpreting somewhere, and I was interpreting for a gentleman, and he goes, I need to make a phone call. And he didn't tell me what it's about, but I figured out pretty quickly what it was about. I'm a smart fella. And he was unhappy about some business exchange that went down, and so he's kind of complaining. He started out being kind of nice, and I'm a nice guy, so I'm interpreting. I'm interpreting nice. I wasn't really satisfied with the experience that I had, and they weren't budging. I forget what it was, but all I know is he began signing a little more intensely, shall we say, and the expressions were quite upset. And I just kept on interpreting my sweet southern self. And we got done. And he goes, why did you not interpret what I was saying? And I'm like, I said everything you said. He goes, oh, no, you didn't. You didn't say it how I said it. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. I just wasn't uncomfortable screaming and yelling and getting nasty on the phone with him. But he's like, don't you ever do that to me again. I'm like, yes, sir. Yes, sir. You're my boss. I'm supposed to do that. I should have done it, but I didn't feel good doing it. But my point is, we all at times, and I've been that culprit too on the other end of the phone when that customer service didn't give me my money back like I wanted to. We just kind of tell them what we're going to do, and that's just what we do. And we can then take that out. And as a result, we go to the gas station or Target or Dollar General, wherever, and we think that person has an occupation less than maybe what we think we have, and we can then be inclined to treat them or interact with them, or at least value them less than as if they were more than us. Is that the same here in East Jordan, or is that just where I live? Okay. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, rather in humility, value, honor others above yourself. Not looking to your own interest, but each of you to the interest of the others. And then it's like Paul's writing, and he's not in person with the people, but it's like he's writing. He's like, they ain't got no idea what I'm talking about, do they? I lost them. Let's say it like this. In your relationships with one another, have the same mindset of Christ, who do that. And this is, on the one hand, very simple, and yet it's a very revolutionary way of living. And I've got just 10 quick examples of what are ways that you and I can do these words. And then you probably got some really good examples of things that you've learned, you're practicing, or maybe you can theorize that we could all do. And so maybe there'll be some space we can just add to it. But I just got 10 quick ones. Just ways to embody just a mindset, a kingdom mindset of honoring others. Number one, practice the downward gaze. What do I mean by that? In the Roman culture, it's all I'm looking up, and I'm trying to find my way up, and I'm never going to look down I'm never going to bow down to someone less than me. But to practice a downward gaze, yeah, I want to look at Jesus. Don't get me wrong. But I want to remind myself, like, I'm actually to look down and lift someone else up. And it may be to practice downward gaze is more of a morning prayer. God, may you use me today to lift, encourage someone else up. What's the way to do that? Maybe a practice way, and this will overlap with another one. But when you walk into a room and you see that person that's a little socially awkward, I know you don't have any around here, but maybe at work or somewhere, go to that person. When you show up and there is that person that is alone or for whatever reason is kind of outside the circle, what would it look like for me to go to that person? It's really hard for teenagers to do because it's all about like who's who and who am I with. But the kid that's not cool, the kid that's not popular, the kid that like, man, I don't know, they're just a little weird, man. I don't know. I don't want to go near them because then they'll see me this way. Well, Paul's like, who cares how they see you? I want you to see them the way I see them, and I want you to help them see themselves the way that I see them. But that's true for adults too. It's true for adults too. Because sometimes adults too, I know probably none of us, but probably all of us, there are times we believe things about ourselves that just aren't true. And at times somebody could come alongside and just be like, nah, you are this wonderfully and fearfully made. Number one, practice the downward gaze. Number two, name and notice. In other words, kingdom mindset of honoring others just means I notice other people. Sounds a lot like the first one, I know. But I notice people. You notice when they're, man, are you okay? You notice. You name them. Like, what's your name? And then you remember their name. And then you go back to family fare and you acknowledge that person by name. And they're like, do I have a name tag on? No, you told it to me last time I was here. You weren't here. That was 3 weeks ago. You remember my name? Yeah, because I wrote it down. Because I wanted to remember it. That's in my head. I don't tell them that. But like, there's power by just naming a person, remembering a person, noticing a person. And I'm a frequent failure. I love my phone. I love catching up on the news. I like reading the Bible in public, right? Yeah, like whatever, and how good it can be. If it's so good, it causes me to miss the person before me. It ain't that good. Like there once was a rabbi, a granddaddy rabbi, and then he lived next door to his son, who was a rabbi, and then his son just had a baby. And in the other room, the baby began crying, right? And Daddy Rabbi is studying, deep in studying, reflecting on Scripture. And in the room beyond that, like Grandpa Rabbi is studying the Torah, and he's into the Torah. And he's like, he's reflecting, he's praying, and then he's like, what's up with my grandson? And he goes back, and he's praying and reflecting. The baby continues to cry. Finally, grandfather gets up, walks in. Dad is right here, walks in, picks up the baby, coddles the baby, calms the baby, puts the baby back, walks back in and says, son, what are you doing? I'm studying the words of God, Father. When one studies the words of Torah, they never can't not hear the cries of the world. Whatever you're doing, son, it is not studying Torah. Walk back in his study and close the door. And I think, I don't know, you can dissect the theology of that later, but the point, I think, is sometimes I go in church and there's somebody sitting on the front row or back in the middle, and they got their Bible, and they're just reading their Bible, and they're preparing themselves for worship at times. But if I'm true to myself, I would say at times I did that because I didn't want to talk to you. And I'm an introvert. I don't want to talk to people I don't know. And so if I read my Bible, oh, he's reading his Bible. He's getting ready to meet with the Lord. I won't interrupt him. Thank you, Jesus. And I'm not saying, don't judge somebody. Tomorrow morning, reading your Bible. I see what you're doing. I don't mean that. But what my point is? My point is at times we can just miss the person right before us. And there's a power when we notice. I remember the first time that I was like, all right, God, I want to do better at this. I want to do better at this. I'm gonna put my phone away, And I like the electronic checkout. I ain't gonna lie. Why? Because I don't talk to people. I just beep beep beep, and I'm quicker than them. Sometimes you get behind that slow person, they're like, and if you give them cash, oh my goodness, don't give a person. I love you ladies, but don't give a person under 20 money. Like I go to this one store recently, and I gave him a 10, and it was like 5.55, and she just looked at me. I'm like, I need money back, and she goes, can I get that 5 and a 1? And she's just, I'm like she can't count. She can't count. So, and sometimes they're slow. And so I like to, what's the point? I like to check myself out, right? And so I'm like, no, I actually need to interface with people. And so a good way to do that is actually put myself in the presence of people. So I'm going to stand in line, put my phone in my back pocket, and I'm actually going to pay attention to the people around me. When I get to the line, I'm going to be like, hey, how's it going? Which people freak out when you get to the end of the line at family fair or wherever you go, and you're like, how are you? And they're like, beep, 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 beep. Did you say something? Yeah. I said, how are you? I can sign it too if you want, right? And it shocks them because they're like, I'm not used to people like talking to me, and definitely not used to talking to me and looking me in the eye. But I remember the first time, I'm like, Jesus, I want you to help me do this. I was at CVS down near my house, and I always was just like, self-checkout. But I went in the line. I stood in line too. There was like 3 people there. It was really painful for me. But I finally got to the line. Like, sorry, like just sharing my heart. I finally got to the line, and I'll never forget. I looked at the guy and I'm like, how's it going? He's like, beep, beep, beep. Did you say something? I said, yeah, man. How's it going? And he's like, and he literally did this. I'm here, and he just does one of these. Like he looked over my shoulder. It wasn't hard. It wasn't hard. He just like looked over my shoulder to see if nobody was there, and then he's just like, dude, it's been one of the longest days I've had. And it's just like homie, like almost starts crying in CVS. I just was like getting a pack of gum, right? And but I just asked, like, and he's like, I work 2 jobs and I'm trying to pay bills and I haven't, and it's just, and it wasn't like he fell on his knees and the Holy Spirit fell and like he got healed and slain the Spirit and accepted Jesus and going to Zimbabwe to be a missionary. I mean, it wasn't like that, but it was this moment that told me when you slow down and you see another human who's made in the image of God and you just pay attention, like there something powerful can happen. That's number 2. Number 3, ask before advising. What do I mean? We're really good, at least I am, about telling you what you need to do to fix yourself. And humility, I think it just has space to, like, tell me more about that. Tell me more about that. Tell me more about that. Like, I don't want to brag on your pastors, but I'm bragging on your pastors. Like, we were out in public somewhere today, and we bumped into somebody, but in their story, they just shared that they embodied this for me. They just listened, and then they asked me where I was at, and then they just stepped into my mess with me. They didn't try to fix me. Just paraphrasing. They didn't try to fix me. They just stepped in there right with me and started walking with me, and I'm no longer in the funk. I'm standing on a place that's solid, and it happened just because they just salute. How are you? And then they're just inviting me out. It's asking before advising. It's sitting with them. It's listening. Number 4, sit lower, sit lower, sit lower. What does that mean? Maybe it means you're last in line to family gathering, or maybe it means you open the door. Maybe it means you help somebody. But what's a way? Sit lower just simply means I'm down here, and I'm going to recognize. I'm going to help you. How can I serve you? How can I honor you? Number 5, celebrate others' successes. The race of honors is all about competition, and yet Jesus, and we see this in the book of Philippians, it invites us all about celebration of what God is doing. And one of the things I love about Paul is in all of his writings, he's like in Philippians, he's like, I thank my God every time I remember you. In all my prayers, I'm always filled with joy. And he says that. And the Philippians, you're like, well, he should. Those guys were boss. Like, those guys were like bankrolling him, and they didn't have any money, but they're supporting his, they paid his way to Thessalonians, and then they paid his way. Like, they're supporting him financially. Sure, he thinks good about them. But you read the introduction to the letter of 1 Corinthians, and those cats were crazy. And they're all kind of messed up and sin. And yet Paul's like, but I know Jesus he's at work in you. You're not letting him work all the way yet. And I'd like to help you. But he's like, but you still have this gratitude in this letter that he's writing even to them when they didn't have it all together. What's my point? What is it like that you and I could just be more grateful Paul speaks all through Philippians about just gratitude and thanks and praise to God for others. And let me just put it in layman's terms. What would it be like for me just to encourage other people? To identify where, to put it in maybe younger people, where they're just crushing it, where they're doing really good, where they're awesome. And the opposite of that is that I compare myself to you. And I compare my personality to you, and I compare my giftings to you, and I compare my car to you, or my house to yours, or my spouse to yours, or whatever it is that we could be prone to do. But and in all my comparing, what I then don't do is speak life to what God is doing within you, because I'm hoping Bart will come around and tell me how great I am. And what the gospel demonstrates and what Paul is reflecting is that if I can look up and honor others above myself and pay interest to others, not just my own, and to use some other places like Ephesians 4 where I can speak encouragement into them, I become the avenue by which God uses to bless, encourage, strength, and catapult somebody into what God has called them to be. And that may be even more fulfilling than me being told I'm pretty special. And it happens just as I celebrate others' success. I celebrate who they are. Number 6, serve without credit. Serve without credit. I do something for someone else, and I don't have to have you brag about it to somebody else. I have a friend. Can I share this? I have a friend who's a pastor. It's not Bart, by the way. He lives down South State, so that's probably why right there, right? He's living in the wrong side of the state. And but nonetheless, he goes, I was in his office, and I'm looking at his bookshelf, because that's what I do when I go to people's houses or office for that bookshelf. I just snoop. I look at their books, because you learn a lot about people and their books, and the kinds of books they're reading. So I'm looking at his bookshelf and stuff, and he goes, and I find this one little thing. It looked like a kindergartner made it or something. It was, I don't know, it was kind of strange. And I was like, oh, what's this? He goes, oh, a group of men. My church gave it to me. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. What is it? And so he tells me a little bit about it, and he goes, oh, I got to tell you. I'm like, what? He goes, oh, never mind. I'm like, no, what? He goes, the guys that gave me that actually came up to me the Sunday after they gave me that, and they were upset with me that I didn't tell the whole church about the gift that they gave me. I'm like, are these men or these middle schoolers? He's like, these are men. I'm like, Lord Jesus, help them all. And nonetheless, but my point is, what is it like to, sometimes we serve because we want to, right? And yet Paul's like, just consider, help them, pay for them, buy them something, encourage them, etc. Number 7, curiosity as a form of compassion. Paul says in Philippians 2:4 to look not only to your own interests, but to the interest of others. And it literally, it's not just like, it's not like you look, it's this intense looking into, like, what are you into? Like, tell me more about that. Like, why is that? Really? How long have you been doing that? How did you get into that? And curiosity is a form of love. Curiosity is a form of compassion. Curiosity, tell me more. That is fascinating. But what stalls that is my own insecurity, which is sin, which is pride, because I want to talk more about me. But if I just lean in and ask, curious, it's one of the highest forms of love. But beyond that, I'm actually looking to your own interest. Beyond that, I'm honoring and valuing you above myself. Beyond that, it might unlock something in this other person that gets ignited in the world, which is kind of cool. Number 8, we're almost done with these. Practice shared meals. In this culture, you only ate with certain people that could roll with you financially. You only ate with certain people, maybe, that thought the way you thought. But what would it be like to actually invite someone different into my space for the purpose of, 1, honoring them, but 2, just sharing a meal? I don't know what it's like in East Jordan, but down where I live, like, people don't get along if they don't think the same. People don't get along. Their theology's different. They're one of those people. One of what people? Those people. What people? Woo! Those people. Oh, those people. I got it. Or whatever, right? Oh, they're one of those people. What people? Well, they're on the other side of the political fence. Like, and what we've lost is the very thing Jesus said that if we had, the whole world would know we were part of his kingdom. What was that? He got 4 fishermen, a tax collector, 2, maybe 3 zealots that kill people who are tax collectors, and then a couple guys we don't know what they did. And he's like, boys, welcome to the team. And they're like, you invited him on my team? Yeah, I got the guy that probably would have killed you if I'd left you out there. You got him on the team. He won't even stand up for what's right. I know. You'd have killed him too. And Jesus is like, tell you what, when you guys learn how to play ball together, moreover, when you learn how to love, when you learn how to love of different political views and backgrounds and socioeconomic backgrounds, when you learn how to love, the whole world is going to know this is the real deal. And when the real deal's broke, the whole world's going to think you're a joke. And we might, I don't know, I don't want to get myself in trouble here, but we might live in a time where the world looks at the church, and the church looks at times in places like a joke, because the church has forgotten, how do I love people that think, act, believe, and voted different than me? I don't want to endorse that dumbness. Yeah, okay. But something Jesus seemed to say, when this is in play, something's greater than, because we all see things from a dim perspective, Paul would say. We digress. What does it mean to practice shared meals, to invite ourselves, to invite others into our space, to listen to them and their perspective, to learn, to laugh? Number 9, honor by presence, not just performance. In other words, that I'm going to honor you because you're a human made in God's image, not just because of what you can do for me. I'm going to honor the person at the gas station or the service station or the coffee shop or wherever. I'm going to honor the person doing the menial task as if they were the most important person in the room. Why? Because they deserve honor, not because of their performance, per se. I got a workshop in this from my daddy. Man, my dad's a stud, by the way. And a couple years ago, he came to visit me in Texas, where I was on staff as a church, as a pastor. And we'd done a little tour of the church. And I'm trying to get him out of the church to drive him to San Antonio, which is 4 hours away from where we live. And we were late. And, I'm trying to, come on, Daddy, we got to go. And I'm showing him church. And I just whisked right out the back door of the church offices. And Francis was there. And Francis was one of our custodians. And Francis was just, spraying and squeegeeing the window. And I just whisked right by Francis. And my dad, he went out. He stopped. And I'm in a hurry. Daddy, we got to go. He stepped back in. He said, ma'am, I got to tell you, I've been walking around this church for the last hour. I have never seen a church as clean as this church. And I know how hard it is to keep those windows clean. You are doing an amazing job. I'm like, Daddy, we got to go. And I see tears in Francis's eyes because somebody recognized her and affirmed her work as kingdom work. Because that makes a difference. And I remember I'm just like, I'm like Tonto with Lone Ranger. Who is this masked man? I mean, I just walked to the car and I'm like, who are you? And I just felt convicted to my bones. Like that is one of the most beautiful acts of honoring I've seen in a long time. And he wasn't doing it he's just doing it because that's who he was and who he is. And but it's honoring others' presence, not just their performance. Now, she's doing a good job, but more than honoring her squeegee ability, he was honoring the presence of a person. And then lastly, last one that I have, just a daily descent prayer. And I'm going to take this from Jesus' example that Paul gives. He says, though he's in the image of God, he did not consider equality with God something to be grasped or used to his own advantage. So Jesus did not grasp. What does that look like for you and I? I release control. I release control. He made himself nothing. It just simply to say, Jesus, I'm going to lay myself down. I hope I do good at my job. And, a raise wouldn't be bad either. And a promotion's always good too. But I'm not doing this for just status and status alone. I really want to do what Paul said in Colossians. I want to work at it with all my heart as if working for God. And Paul even tells the slaves in Colossians 3, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord, not for human masters, not when their eyes on you to curry their favor, but no, with reverence in your heart, sincerity for God. He's like, yeah, I know you're doing it for the master, but no, it's so much bigger. Jesus, he took the form of servant. And what are ways I can just simply serve another? That's prayer. He humbled himself and chose the low place. He became obedient and says, I'll do whatever you want. And Paul says this is the mindset you're to have. It's a kingdom mindset. And it's completely different than the world Paul was writing into. And it's completely different in the world in which you and I live in. Can I pray for us? God, that's a lot. But when we slow down, our world is chasing the same things Rome was chasing. And at times, we can prop up ourselves on the same things they did. And yet, we want to have the same mindset as Jesus. We want to live as citizens of heaven, which means we want to have a mindset of your kingdom, a kingdom mindset, which in part is that we learn to honor others, serve others, lean into others, be curious of others. And it will probably result in encouraging, lifting them up. And who knows? But those very acts and that very posture and that very mindset will be part of what puts the world back together with the love and grace and power of your Son, Jesus. So may we do our part. And we give you permission to convict us when we step into selfish ambition and vain conceit. We're propping up our own kingdoms. May you lead us and guide us to look to the other. In Jesus' name. Everybody said, amen. Pastor Bart.